If you've ever felt like OKRs are a burden or that they don't work and you've questioned, isn't there a better way? Well, this session is for you because we're going to be talking about why goals and OKRs don't work and what you can do instead. There is a much better way and it makes work so much better and it drives better results. What's not to like?
So for those reflecting, is it worth the time? Radhika, what would be the key takeaways from the podcast today?
Both of our stories on why goals and OKRs don't work, our own experiences, and I felt like there was such a wealth of information there. And we talked about how puzzle setting and puzzle solving just opened up so much more possibility for product teams and solving bigger problems, making work feel better and driving better results. And lastly, the key takeaway was just how you do puzzle setting and puzzle solving so it doesn't feel like everyone is off in the playground and will come back when they're done playing.
Hello, welcome to Untrapping Product Team. Here we speak the unfiltered truth about creating digital products. Today we have Radhika Dutt, author of Radical Product Thinking, who's now writing a new thought-provoking book in the area of escaping the performance trap. Radhika, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm excited to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. I remember when we met in Lisbon, you're just getting ready for Productize and you shared some thoughts there. And you had an amazing talk about your book back then, like Radical Product Thinking. It was very inspiring.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It was really nice to meet in Lisbon. I'm glad that we get to chat again.
And now you are challenging something that people love, other people hate, which is, yeah, it's true. Yeah, I see this kind of relationship. I don't see much in between. But what I'm seeing now, the claim you're making, which is quite interesting to me, OKRs and goals are killing your team's performance. What makes you challenge OKRs and goals?
We haven't challenged this concept of OKRs or goal setting since it became entrenched in business culture, right? And it turns out it's a 75-year-old idea. And I'm not exaggerating, even though OKRs sound new because John Doerr evangelized them in 2018. The reality is the same ideas relabeled and repackaged. They date all the way to 1940s. They haven't really changed from Peter Drucker's days in the 1940s. At the time, it was revolutionary, right? And why was it revolutionary at the time? I went back and looked at history. Peter Drucker at the time in the 1940s, what problem was he solving for which goal setting seemed so perfect and revolutionary? He was working with General Motors at the time. The workforce of that era in the 1940s was primarily an unskilled workforce. They were working on assembly lines where there was very little automation. And so the kinds of problems that they were solving was, Andy is installing tires and Bob is too. And then I can tell who's a better performer because, one installed 40 tires, the other installed 45. Great, easy to see because there's one right way to install tires. It's very easy to see who's a good performer. And what I say about goals and OKRs killing performance is when you use the same mindset to evaluate and to drive performance today in teams, let's take the problem of manufacturing even in today's world, where everything that could be automated mostly has been. So let's look at Boeing's factory floor, where you're constructing airplanes and you use production targets, right? What happens? You see the kind of quality issues on planes where you have panels flying off. This is not what we want. We don't want to kill teams' performance. What goals and OKRs do is create performance theater. And for all the product people listening, they'll find this familiar where, think about all the heroics that you have to do at the end of every month to be able to prepare for monthly business reviews where you're trying to figure out how do I show these numbers, right? And frankly, even if you're not being malicious, even when you're not trying to spin numbers, it kind of biases you because you want to see the good numbers and show those good numbers and say, ta-da, look at this. All my OKRs are green. And so what happens is you're actually just even subconsciously sort of sweeping under the rug those bad numbers. And that's not what you want as a leader.
I can connect to that very much. And I have a little confession here. When I first became a CEO, I thought I need to give clarity to this team. And there's this cool framework, OKR, I had worked with that. So my mistake, I set an objective and I set a few key results. What happened? The team start competing. So they start owning the key results. And in the end, was like kind of a fight instead of a collaboration. And what I got it wrong was that frameworks, they should help the teams collaborate, accelerate, and so on. And in this case, we were having arguments. Are we doing OKRs right? OKRs supporting us move and so on. And how are we doing it? We start having these weird conversations. And then after 6 months, for me, it was very clear. It was indeed killing our performance. I said, I'm ditching. We don't have OKRs. We have one thing we want to achieve the next quarter. And this is the one thing. Let's figure out how to get that together. I named one goal. It was one goal, not goals. And that helped quite a lot. So I can see what you're sharing. And one thing I want to ask you is like, can you share like an example from your experience, like where it backfired?
I'm going to take an example from sales and an organization that we had. And by the way, I really love your example as CEO. What I love is also that you were talking about how you had made this mistake. First of all, even being willing to say that, right? I so appreciate that. But also on top of that, you didn't fall trap to what a lot of OKR experts say. They say, well, if it didn't work for you, it just means you set the wrong goals. Whereas I think what you were realizing, and this is the importance of this balance between I was wrong, but at the same time, knowing for yourself what didn't sit right with this sort of advice and having that thoughtfulness that, yeah, maybe OKRs wasn't the right way, but it's not that you were wrong that OKRs don't work, right? So I loved everything that you said, and there's so much nuance there. The reality is it's not just a matter of if you just set the right goals, then everything works well, right? It's a much bigger problem than that. So my own experience around what I've seen, I'll give you two. One is a mistake that I had made, and one is something I observed elsewhere. The mistake I had made was, in our startup, we were very early stage, and what we wanted to see was, getting to at very early stages, 1,000 signups a month. And then, we wanted to get to 20,000 signups. And that's how we were thinking about it, right? And what I realized was, time came and went. We hit those numbers or didn't. And my realization was setting those goals by themselves didn't mean very much. The reality is you're constantly looking at the conversion funnel and you're figuring out like different things. Like it may not make sense to optimize for signups. Maybe the answer is just looking at the top level and even saying, how do I get people to just engage with my landing page long enough that they might sign up, right? So it's even before that. So whatever numbers you set, I realized that it's focusing you on the wrong area because you discover as you're executing where the actual problem and bottleneck lies. When you start by setting goals at the beginning, it may or may not be the right thing to even track at the time. So that's one example. The second example is what I was going to talk about earlier, which is about sales, right? We've always learned that for sales, to drive sales, you need targets. And even there, I saw that things go wrong. There was a company I was working at, it was called Avid, and we dominated the video editing business in movies. Every movie that won an Oscar or was nominated for an Oscar was using Avid for video editing. At some point, when you looked at our sales numbers, you would see that we were hitting targets, exceeding them too. But what was happening underneath was actually our market was getting eroded. Our low end was eroded by Adobe and Apple, our mid-tier too. And yet we were hitting numbers. How were we doing that? Because we were going further and further up into the high end. And it worked until it didn't work. And so targets made it seem like, let's keep investing in this business. Whereas the reality was, we should have put a do not resuscitate order on our video editing business, killed it off and said, what should we do for the movie business instead? What are other areas that we should truly invest in? And news broadcasting would have been a better investment to pour a lot more money into.
Wow, I connect very much to your examples, how it mislead team, because when I reflect on this situation I had there, it's the signs. Like from a leadership perspective, I always think that a leader should set the space where the teams will be able to succeed. So the teams need to figure out how to succeed, but you need to give them the direction and set the space and empower them. So that was what I tried to do. But then I was looking at the signs. I realized that people were continuously talking about the framework. And I realized that people were refusing to collaborate. Someone would ask for help and say, hey, can you help me with this? Say, hey, I can't because I'm not hitting my numbers.
Yeah.
And I say, but you should help. We are trying to achieve the same thing. Because if you're not hitting your number, that was not the thing. It's a north. So you should go there.
Yeah.
But then people get obsessed with that, right?
I love what you're saying, and it's very much my observation too that it reduces collaboration because you want to hit your numbers because you want to look like a high performer, whereas, by helping someone else, like your own numbers might not look good. And which is why one of the things that OKR experts say, which is, oh, if you're having problems with OKRs, just divorce compensation from OKRs. That's also bullshit. It doesn't work because it's not like you're directly tying compensation. Just the perception of who is a better performer, right, makes someone not want to collaborate because I want to look good to my CEO. I want to show that I'm hitting my numbers. And it's not about compensation. I want to look good.
I've seen many teams working pretty well, and generally is by how success is measured and need to be something collaboratively. I saw one of the teams. It was very interesting. I decided not to join the company, but I had a chance to interview some people after. They had something like this. A senior software engineer had to deliver double the intermediate. Intermediate had to deliver double the junior. When I look at that, junior is the one that needs the most help. But nobody will be willing to help the junior. Probably the senior is the one who can get the junior to grow, but the senior needs to deliver 4 times the junior. And I started interviewing them. I said, well, we don't collaborate at all. So we just compete. And what happens in the end, like they just bloated all the estimations but because they need to show results. And they wanted to show results because they wanted to feel good about it.
This so resonates, right? Because this goes to, well, how clearly the way we evaluate people and even some of the core mindset around evaluation is so misplaced. So maybe let's talk about what do you do instead? Because you brought up so many interesting points. Because you were saying, as a leader, you're supposed to set direction. And yet, if you set goals and targets, that leads people the wrong way. You want people to deliver. And yet, if you set that for a senior developer, you need to be delivering these 4x things, whereas juniors do, a smaller amount, like that screws it up too. So what do you do, right? Because you do want people, you have different expectations of different people. You want to give guidance. So what do you do? And so the answer that I've arrived at after a lot of, trial and error and figuring this out with organizations is a framework I call OHLs. It stands for Objectives, Hypotheses, and Learnings. So OHLs. And what it is a framework for puzzle setting and puzzle solving. And so as a leader, when you set direction, you're setting direction around the puzzle you're solving. So let me give you an example based on an organization that I've been working with. It's called Signal Ocean, and how we set puzzles and then how we went about solving puzzles and how you use this, to give scaffolding to people with different levels of skills and experience. And so let's start with a puzzle setting. So Signal, it's a data platform company in the maritime business where basically people can use this data platform to be able to figure out which ships match which cargoes so that you can optimize better, right, between ships and cargoes. And so what did we do? When we started, the sales and usage at the company had stalled. Right. So the company had grown a bit, but then 2023 sales and usage had stalled. So when I came in, I was saying, okay, so let's look at what is happening on the platform right now. What are people actually doing? And what we figured out was that most of our users, they were really tech-savvy people. So who thought like us, who are the engineering thinkers, right? So these were tech-savvy users. And what we realized is, as we dug into it, well, why aren't people who are not tech-savvy using this? And why is it only brokers? Why aren't these other types of users, like those who operate ships and those who have cargoes, why aren't they using it? And here's what we discovered, that most people in the maritime industry are actually tech averse. And actually, we would have thought, hey, our platform is like magic. It gives you all this data. It's the most accurate. This should be selling like hotcakes. Why is it not? And what we discovered was, for anyone who's tech averse, they hate magic. They don't like tech looking like magic. And in fact, what they don't like is, I want to know that I have control. I know where I'm getting this data. I know exactly how you got this. But can you imagine, for a tech averse user, you start exposing all this stuff. They go like, oh my gosh, whoa, this is way too much information. I'm overwhelmed, right? So the puzzle that we set was, how do we show just enough of this magic to users so that tech-averse users can want this, right? And yet they feel like they have control, but we are not overwhelming them. So that was the puzzle that we set. Until we set this puzzle, we had all sorts of OKRs. We hit some, we didn't hit some, but it wasn't moving the needle in terms of actual sales or usage. But this is the puzzle we set. So that was the objective. How do we make this? How do we solve this puzzle? And then we started solving the puzzle. And I'll go into the framework for solving the puzzle in just a moment, but I'll pause there. Any thoughts that resonate for you in terms of puzzle solving?
Oh, many. Because it turns out the startup I'm mentioning about OKRs is also in the maritime industry.
Ah,
And
what is it?
it's called Omoko. It's a startup in Hamburg. It belongs to a part of Hamburg. And it's very interesting. Exactly the same thing you're saying. It's how do they remain control? I remember this challenge because we did, for example, some magic with the yard and so on. And their favorite tool was something like this, a pen and paper.
Yeah.
They love doing that because they would have full control.
Yeah.
So all the automations and all the cool things that we aim to do scare them. But we were focusing on the OKRs. So eventually we changed, and I started saying something like Kate Sierra. So you need to upgrade the user, not the product. So that was my direction to the team, and I was asking them like, how can we upgrade the yard planner? So it goes in the direction of puzzle you're mentioning. So I connect to that because I didn't have exactly a key result. I was thinking like, we need to upgrade the yard planner. They are using a lot of pen and paper. It's subjected to errors and so on. And then we had to figure out how to solve it. So I'm curious, what is your framework behind it that identifying the puzzle and solving? Because I connect very much to that. If we had continued on the OKRs, it would be misleading, and I agree with you. It was about solving a puzzle and so on, and we didn't really have the key result to put there.
So now
Velocity PM automates product discovery in minutes, not months. Start a workspace, add a short overview, and in 60 seconds, the Velocity agent delivers your canvas, problem maps, story maps, and initiatives. The canvas highlights your users, jobs, and problems. Problem maps review outcomes, opportunities, and experiments. Story maps turn initiatives into epics and user stories, ready for your backlog with one click. The initiative board turns ideas into actions, build prototypes, create tickets, and link to your roadmap. Velocity PM cuts months of work so you can move from insights to action instantly.
So now let's get into puzzle solving. So objectives is to summarize the puzzle setting. And so hypotheses and learnings are the puzzle solving part. But, when I say hypotheses and learnings, like, how do you use that? So here are the 3 questions for puzzle solving. So the first question is, how well did it work? Right? So whatever you tried, how well did it work? And it's a very different question from OKRs, because it's not a binary question. I'm not asking, did you or didn't you hit this target? It's really, tell me the good and the bad and tell me how well it worked. And if I understand the puzzle well enough, then I can define a hypothesis, and that hypothesis is going to be my first attempt at solving this puzzle. So the hypothesis might be, if I try this experiment, then this is the outcome that I expect to see, because here's the connection. And then I might have leading and lagging indicators to see, how well did this hypothesis test out. In explaining this, how well did it work, I'm looking at both the good and bad metrics and deciding, okay, like what all have we figured out from this? Then comes the second question, right? So how well did it work? Then the second question is, what did we learn? And this is where I say to the teams, if you're going to spit out all these numbers like time spent on site, weekly active users, bounce rate, blah, 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 stop. I don't want to see any of those numbers in this column of how well did, or what have we learned. You look at those numbers and tell me the story, tell me the narrative of what have you figured out. And so that's the second question, what did you learn? And then comes the third question. Based on how well it worked and what did you learn, what would you try next? And this is where, it's really the light bulb moment, because I say, imagine I give you a magic wand and you get to ask whatever you want of this magic wand. What would you ask for based on what you learned and what you and how well things worked? And so these three questions together are like the left brain, which is the analytical side and saying how well it worked, and then the right brain of what did you learn, the story, and what will you try next with this magic wand, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's quite interesting because you remain on the experimentation and it's about trying something and learning. And what I tell many teams, it is not how fast you deliver, it is how fast you learn. And with OKRs, we may get focused very much on deliver. There is a target there and so on, but it is all about the learning. And there's a sentence from Martin Dauman. He used a lot once he tried to explain what is agile in one sentence. I think it was Scrum he tried to explain. And he said, like, it's using what we know to discover what we don't. And I take that with me. Working with product, it's like the same, using what we know to discover what we don't. And what are you saying? Come up with hypotheses. So that requires some reflection and then learnings. So what I can see on that is a better outcome because we reflect. And the big question is, how fast do we make that happen?
So much to unpack there, and I love it, right? Because one of the things that happens is when we think of what you said, what you learn and the pace of that learning is so important. I think that is much more important than how quickly are you experimenting. Often companies get obsessed with this question of, are you experimenting fast enough? And there are all these, resources that I've seen. There's one piece of advice that goes like, you should be trying 3 experiments a day. If you're not, you're too slow. I find that to be bullshit, because the reality is the size of your experiment depends on the puzzle you're solving. There might be certain puzzles that require a big enough experiment that if you try something small just to hit this metric of how many experiments are you running a day, then those are wasted experiments, because you'll never try anything that's big enough to really move the needle. So that's one thing. The second is, you talked about business results. You're exactly right that this is what led to business results, because we were learning along the way, and then that helped us actually achieve those business results. So I'll talk about the business results in a moment, and I'll just give you an example of how we applied this. How well did it work? What did we learn? What will we do next? So one example was the mobile app, right? So we were looking at the mobile app, and we thought that from the mobile app, what users want to do is see certain lists that they had created on desktop. So we thought that was our main hypothesis. And so in terms of how well it worked, well, it turned out that yes, some people want to see those lists that they had created on their desktop, but that's not what everyone wanted to do. And so then the product manager, she went and figured out, so what can we learn from this? So she looked at all sorts of data. And so she came back to me with, in terms of what have we learned, she came back with a list of, based on the data, here is the prioritized order of questions that people have in their minds when they come to our mobile app. Like, here are the things that they go in and dig for in the mobile app. Like, this is the list of questions. And I'll give you just one example of such a question. Number 3 on the list was, how long will it take for this vessel to get to this particular port? That was number 3 on the list. And so based on coming up with such an ordered list, she came up with, what will I try next? And it was a brand new idea of a landing page that guides you through sort of the main things that you seem to have in your head when you go to the mobile app. Let's talk about, business results, because the same mindset, like we developed it after just 2 or 3 times of using this framework of how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? And we started applying this across the whole platform. Every product manager was thinking in this way. And so here are the results. Remember, sales had stalled in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
We doubled sales in 2024 and doubled sales in 2025. Not only that, we reduced churn from 26% to 4%. And in the areas where we're using this puzzle setting, we increased usage by about 180%. This was a lot better than what we had ever done with goal setting or OKRs. And not to mention just how much more team bonding and collaboration there was. Like, we truly have fun working together now.
One thing that you said, and people are reflecting now, I'm pretty sure, about experiment. They're saying, I'm told I should run several experiments. And one thing I keep saying is like, experiments are the means. They're not the end. So it's not about running experiments, because then people start setting up several A/B tests. And I always ask the same question. What did you learn? I learned that people like more the light blue than the blue. I said, what does it mean then? It's about what you can learn from the experiment. So yes, if you can run an experiment and learn something in a few hours, do it. But to increase the evidence strength, you need to have some more robust experiment. And you always need to think like, what is the learning objective I have behind it? Because if you're not learning, that will be very hard to get to the outcome.
Such an important point. And I think it goes to the heart of what do you even define as an experiment, right? Because those experiments might come in many different forms. By the time you're A/B testing, I call A/B testing optimization. A/B testing is when you've completely figured out the puzzle and you just want to figure out this last little thing. Is this better or this better? It's like an eye exam. You've pretty much honed in on what is that last step. Is this view better or this? That's when you're doing A/B testing. To solve a puzzle, you're never going to just solve it by doing A/B testing, right? And so what does an experiment actually mean? An experiment can be actually just even a user interview where you're exploring some question that you've really defined very clearly in your head based on the puzzle. You want to ask certain questions about their workflow, what they're doing, how they think about it. That even could be the experiment. Or the experiment could be within that user interview. Maybe you are showing them certain screens, and it might not even be a clickable prototype. It might be a foundation for a conversation. The next level of an experiment might be a clickable prototype where, you think this is the solution because you've had enough indication and then you're testing out the solution. Or a bigger experiment might be that you have pretty good confidence that this is the right track that you're on. And so you implement it in code and you're actually seeing what are the results of that feature. So what experiment you're running depends on how much confidence do you have on that being the next step in solving the puzzle, and therefore the level of risk you're going to take or invest resources to be able to get an answer to the learnings.
Now, looking at your framework, OHL. So one thing that I'm thinking about here is, how do you stay ambitious without the target? You made it clear that you quadrupled the results. Say you stalled and then you doubled 24 and doubled 25. But now, how did you remain ambitious? That's something I'm curious about.
That is so interesting, right? We always think as leaders, and this is what we've been taught, so I don't blame any of us, right? Because I used to think this way. We've learned that the way you motivate teams is by setting those aspirational goals. We assume that people need external motivators. My own experience is when you have high performers, when you have humans on the team, that we all like puzzles. Let's try this experiment right now, right? I'm going to try this with you, David.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Tell me how you feel at the end of each question, right? So the first question for you is, What goals do you want to solve for your business this year? What goals do you want to achieve this year for your business, right? That's the first question.
Do I need to answer now or just to think?
And I'm going to give you the comparison and you can answer
Okay,
both for
okay.
me. The comparison is I'm going to ask you, what puzzles do you want to solve for your business?
Probably for the first one, what goals I want to achieve. It's a bit overwhelming. I feel like I need to make up some things. So I would look at the previous year or something like that, and I'll say I need to be better. So let me figure out that. And there's a big chance I would connect to numbers, revenue, or something like that. So that's something. Now, if I think about puzzle, I'm running now a new mastermind. It's called the 100x PM, from product manager to product leader. If I think in terms of puzzle, I would say like, how do I equip people attending this cohort so they get motivated and get promoted faster than they can if they would have not attended? So I would start thinking exactly on this.
I love it. So here are some observations, right? When I ask you what goals do you want to achieve this year, you're thinking like what you described about being overwhelmed. It feels like a burden. You're going to have to look back at numbers from past year, etc. All of this, none of it was spurring ideas for you. None of it was spurring any sort of creativity, or enthusiasm. I was not seeing the same motivation. I was not seeing that motivation. Whereas when I asked you, what puzzles do you want to solve this year? Look at that. It's like you had a flood of ideas for it instantly. I didn't even give you that much time to think. You instantly had all these ideas coming to you in terms of what puzzles you want to solve, right? So that's the answer to this question. You don't need goals and aspirational numbers to drive teams. Set puzzles for your team. So as a leader, how do you give them direction? Set puzzles. I constantly push my team in terms of what their analysis is like in terms of solving those puzzles, right? So when they come back to me with answers on how well did it work, what have you learned, what are you going to try next? If the answers to what have you learned are not deep enough for me, like I can ask just a couple of questions and I can see the depth of your thinking. If I'm not seeing that depth, I'll give you that feedback. Like, look, wait, but have you thought about this or this? What did you learn from this? You're saying that this number is high, that therefore they want this functionality because 45% of the people are using this functionality. Wait, is that because that's the landing page? In which case that data is not valid for me. I dig into numbers a little bit with them. Tell me what you learned. And then this question of what will you try next? Like I can see how well you're solving the puzzle. That's where I know how well you're actually performing because I can see how well you're solving this puzzle. And so going back all the way to the beginning of our discussion where we were saying, that we can develop people's performance, give them scaffolding. So someone with maybe whose skills or experience is less, I give them more scaffolding as they're solving these puzzles. They need a little bit more handholding. Someone who has more of these skills and experience, great, I can see that you're ready for the next big puzzle. And that's how we harness everyone's performance, right? Those who can take the next bigger puzzle, I'm going to throw that bigger puzzle at you. That's how, as a leader, you're constantly giving feedback and solving bigger and more impactful puzzles all the time. And that's how you drive business results. It's not by setting numbers and saying, aha, go get this.
Because everyone is saying we need to have the moonshot, we need to have this, we need to set the goals, and so on and so on. And I can understand. It's like it's hard to set a goal that feels meaningful, actually, because if you just come up with a number, like today people want purpose. That's what people want. And I say, like, okay, let's reach 100 million users. There's no meaning in that. Maybe you say you are better than competition or you're bigger, but that doesn't inspire many people. But if you give some people responsibility of solving a puzzle and they feel like they contributed to that, I can engage. I remember the best thing, like if I go back to this one, like how do we upgrade the yard planner? That was something got people engaged. Like how do you do that? Like that was a puzzle. We didn't have the answer. We didn't have a metric. We didn't. So we were asking like this and then iterating. So I like that very much. It's very, very different.
And to your point about as a leader, we're told we have to set those goals at the beginning. But it comes from a place of leaders are expected to know the answer. And I think that is increasingly the trend, where there's this fad of founder mode. And, we have to, uh, like, founder mode is supposed to be where you have the best knowledge in terms of what is needed, what the solution is. But I find that to be bullshit. The reality is, right, as a leader, you have some ideas. You may or may not be right. You cannot know everything at the beginning of the year. And to which, by the way, a lot of OKR experts right now are going to say, well, that just means you need to set goals every quarter, set them more often, which is also bullshit because even if I set them more often, one, there's the process burden of all of that and tracking whether how I'm doing, etc., against those. And two, it assumes that I know that this is the right solution this quarter. Where is the space for figuring out what is the right thing to do? And therefore, the idea is set direction using what puzzles are you going to solve? And then you start solving these puzzles through how well is it working? What have we learned? What are we going to try next? And when you have this continuous feedback loop to your teams, you avoid all this process burden of tracking numbers. It's a lot less process overhead and so much more motivating.
You feel like you are progressing and you are evolving, learning. Because when people feel like they are learning and creating something meaningful, it is motivating. And then the results will come naturally. I was talking about the 100x PM, which is my product.
Mhm.
And the truth is, I didn't set any metric for that one.
Yeah.
So yes, as a leader, I tend to set metrics quite often. But for this one, the first thing I said, I want to create a cohort that will help product people grow. And then the way I started was like, how do I pack content in a way that inspires people? So I started trying that out and so on and so on. But I focus on the progress. So in a way, there was a puzzle. I continuously iterated, and then I ran with a small group. Now I'm gonna run the second one and so on. But it's the journey itself, and I didn't have a metric, and I was happy with the results. Better than I expected, actually.
You keep getting better and you might solve bigger puzzles. The way you get more aspirational is by solving a bigger puzzle. And that sort of creates a clear path for how do you grow, right? Versus just setting a high aspirational target. Like you might say, I want to get to, X 100,000 and X million in terms of revenues versus that doesn't set a clear path for what do I do? Whereas you really need to define what is that next bigger puzzle I should solve to keep growing, and then the next bigger puzzle, right? So I love what you're describing.
So for those who are listening, I imagine they are wondering, where do I start? If you would give tips, for example, let's take the two potential audience listening here, leaders and product managers. What would you tell them like to try out this week?
Let's start with the product managers and people who are individual contributors. Even if your organization uses OKRs, it's okay. You don't need permission to start using this way of experimentation, learning, and adaptation. And so it is our natural instinct to want to grow, to solve puzzles. So start using this framework of OHLs for setting puzzles, like thinking about your work and setting puzzles and thinking about how you'll solve them using this template of how well did it work? What did we learn? What are we going to try next? So this is what you can do as a product manager. And within your sphere of influence, where you feel comfortable or where you feel like you have that psychological safety, you can use this framework to communicate because you'll see that it prompts a different sort of a discussion, right? It becomes less evaluatory and judgmental about have you or haven't you hit numbers. So where you have that safety, share this information around how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? So that's for the individual contributor. For leaders, if you have the ability to de-emphasize OKRs, that is great. And what you really want to do is build this capability in your team for experimentation, learning, and adaptation, because that is how you're going to scale as a leader. right? When your team needs your input everywhere, they need you everywhere in meetings where you can't just leave them to go solve puzzles. It's hard to scale as a leader. So this approach gives you scaffolding so that you can do different levels of handholding for people with different levels of skills and experience. And so start by even using this yourself. Think about an initiative or something that you had taken on. Think about how well did it work? What have you learned? What will you try next? And you can present it this way to your whole team so that you help build the mindset and the safety that it's okay to talk about good and the bad, right? So start by presenting it to them and then give them this framework so that and help them in setting a puzzle, give them this continuous feedback. So those are two things that you can do. And the last thing is you can do learning meetings. This is something I've instituted with my team. You create learning meetings where everyone, they pick a feature that they'd been working on and they present information in this format. Like every product manager, you get them to do this where they present how well did it work? What have we learned? What will we do next? And it helps create this mindset and muscle memory for how do you do this. So those are two things that we can do. And finally, you can download the free OHL's toolkit, regardless of your role. So download it. I can share the link that we can use in show notes, but it's on radicalproductthinking.com. Under toolkits, you'll see there's the OHL's toolkit. It's a free download in slides and PowerPoint format so that you can start to use this directly.
It's really a good lesson. And what you said about the learning meeting, regardless of how you work, you can just have one next week already set, talk to your team. Many teams just don't do it. They just go with the flow, keep moving on and moving on. And the beauty of what you shared is people reflecting. So if we're talking specifically about learning, I do know that a lot of people are now allergic to meetings, but in this case, it is a learning session, and I find it so nice for everyone attending because the ones presenting will have to reflect and the others will consume, and then we'll learn from each other as well.
I love what you said. There's a quote I read recently as I started working on this book. And the quote is, "We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience." I thought that was so beautiful. That is exactly what you were saying.
I can connect a lot about the reflection. People have different ways of reflecting. I reflect by writing. People ask me like, what keeps you writing so much? And I say, because the more I write, the more I reflect and the better my thinking evolve. So I love reading my articles of 4 years ago. And then I look at that, wow, I evolved so much. Then I read the one of last year, for example. I say, how did I evolve? This kind of reflection is very powerful, but that's my way. It's not the only way of reflecting. I like writing. Some people do other things. They speak, they can record their speaking or to talk to other people. But the thing is, you need to take the moment to do that. So we are getting to the end of our podcast today. Is there anything else you would like to leave to our audience?
A few things. One is the Radical Product Thinking book. It's at bookstores wherever books are around you. You can also get the OHL's toolkit, which I mentioned. And by the way, you can reach out to me as you use the OHL's templates. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you're using OHLs for puzzle setting and puzzle solving, I would love to hear about your experience. You're welcome to share your thoughts, what worked for you, what was challenging, and your case study might actually make it into the book that I'm working on now. And the book is all about why goals and OKRs don't work and what works instead. The working title is Escaping Performance Trap. That's the working title. I'm reading your book, Untrapping Product Teams.
I find it so thought-provoking, and it's something that we need. And I didn't know that OKRs are from the 40s. And it's true. I use OKRs because, it used to be the cool kid in the block, so everyone is using, so you start using without challenging. But I always reflect, and I decided to ditch. It was embarrassing for me as a CEO to stand in front of everybody and say, you know what, I was wrong, it doesn't work, let's do something else. Yeah, but I said, better I do that now than I do that later, and it's just worse, that's the size of the mass. So do that. I will share all the links you mentioned so people can find all of them and connect with you. And for those listening right now or watching us, I want to emphasize what Radhika just shared. You can reach out to her. And these opportunities is not something you should just take for granted, because this is rare. Like, she is open and she wants to listen to you. When do you have the chance of talking to some experienced people, sharing these and learning? And maybe you can even get your case study to the book. So take this opportunity. I think that was a great lesson. I really appreciate it. There's so many takeaways here. For now, we're going to wrap up, and I hope that everyone listening here is satisfied with the takeaways. And I recommend you to try something out. Try maybe a learning meeting, or try solving a puzzle, setting that, and see how it goes. And write to Radhika. Do that. And let's keep untrapping product teams together. So if you like this kind of content, subscribe. Don't forget sharing with your friends. And let's keep rocking together. Thank you. This episode is brought to you by Product Board, the intelligent product management platform. For over 10 years, Product Board has helped leading organizations like Zoom, Salesforce, and Autodesk build the right products faster. Its end-to-end platform is purpose-built for helping product teams uncover customer needs, define their strategy, and align everyone around the roadmap. And now it's equipping product organizations to excel in the AI era with Product Board Spark, its new specialized agent for product management. Explore new product ideas or generate a product brief in seconds with AI that already understands your product and your business. See how Product Board can help your product teams ship faster and deliver high-impact products. Head to productboard.com/spark.